Doing that for the better part of 2 years, spending virtually all my time covering Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, changed me as a professional, and it changed me as a person and as a man. I grew up in a segregated society. Texas was segregated, legalized state law, institutionalized segregation. We had separate schools, separate lunch counters, separate almost everything. However, bad as things were in Texas for people of color, and they were bad, they were not as bad as they were in places like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. So when I began covering Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, this was an awe-inspiring moment for me, that while I grew up in a segregated society, I had never been to a Ku Klux Klan meeting. There were rumors that there had been Ku Klux Klan meetings in the 20s, but I never had been to one. And to go to Ku Klux Klan meeting and see the hatred, pretty deep hatred there, not only was a first for me, but it turned out to be that and other violence that I saw, transforming moments. I would not have believed that grown people, including police and government authorities, would turn high-pressure fire hoses and dogs on women and children in a peaceful march. But I saw that not only in Birmingham, but in a few other places. But I did that for, as I say, a little over 2 years. And while doing that, President Kennedy announced he was going to Texas for a presidential visit. And because I was from Texas, I was assigned by the network to go to Texas and to arrange our coverage. It was to be routine coverage. It was clearly a political trip to go for the 1964 elections. And I set up our coverage, and as a result of that, I was in Dallas when President Kennedy was assassinated. And then, incredibly, it still seems incredible to me, the assassin was assassinated. Lee Harvey Oswald was killed on Sunday, what we call the 4 dark days in Dallas. Friday, the president was assassinated. Oswald was arrested and was interrogated through Saturday. On Sunday, Oswald was assassinated, and on Monday, we had the national funeral for President John F. Kennedy. During this period, because we hadn't expected much out of the trip, we'd set up coverage, I became the point person for broadcasting on scene from Dallas, which was, I don't like to call it this, but it was another break for me, in the sense that while I had been on television on first the Doug Edwards News and then on the Walter Cronkite News, I was just another line correspondent. After Dallas and our coverage in Dallas, I was promoted, if you want to use that word, to be the White House correspondent. All of this is detailed in rather Outspoken. I tell stories about covering the Kennedy assassination and civil rights. I was moved to Washington as a White House correspondent. I was chief White House correspondent for 10 years, but that was broken up by, I was assigned to London as a foreign correspondent. I went from London to Vietnam to cover the Vietnam War. I was in Vietnam the first time. I was there 4 times, all told. The first time I was there for almost a year in that green jungle hell. And I'll tell you another Gene Rather story here, which also has the added advantage of being true. I had gone to Vietnam. The arrangement was I would go for 3 months. But the war was escalating so quickly, it was clearly becoming the #1 story in the world. And no reporter worthy of the name would leave that kind of story. So we went through this routine. Remember, there were no cell phones in those days. It wasn't impossible to get a phone call out of South Vietnam, but it was very hard. So I tended to have the lengthy conversations with Gene when we take film to a place like Hong Kong or Bangkok. And so 3 months came and went. Gene said, well, are you coming home? And I said, well, not yet. Another 3 months went by, and she said, are you coming home? And I said, well, not yet, honey. You know, it's the greatest story in the world, and I've got to be here. Somewhere along the 6-month mark, I brought film out to Hong Kong, called her, and she said, well, you're in Hong Kong. Catch the next train and come home. I went through my husbandly explanation of why I'd love to come home. This story was still building and still exploding, and I just had to stay where I was.